Today's episode is a story from the Kathasaritasagara, or the ocean of the stream of stories. It's about a prince and a life lesson on why you should never start a story without finishing it, especially if demons are listening in. Welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. In this episode, we are back to the Kathasaritasagara, which literally means the ocean of the stream of stories. It's about a prince who could have been an excellent storyteller, except he had this really bad habit of not finishing his stories. It may feel like a mild annoyance, though paperback novel publishers would have loved it because of the promise it held of never-ending sequels. The story begins one evening with a caravan. The leader of the caravan was the prince himself. Let's call him Rajkumar. A fair choice, because Rajkumar means prince in more than one language in India. Rajkumar had a sidekick called Mantri. Here, I'm taking a creative liberty because though Mantri means minister, Mantri wasn't actually a minister just yet. He was the current minister's son, just as Rajkumar was the king's son. Nepotism was the way of life in that day and age. Rajkumar, Mantri, and about a dozen soldiers and servants were on a mission. You see, Rajkumar was going to marry the princess of the neighboring kingdom. Mantri was coming along because he was Rajkumar's best friend. And more than that, he was the only one who had a bit of a moderating effect on the prince. The prince was vain, arrogant, and generally not the kind of person a princess might be expecting to hitch together for the rest of her life. But Rajkumar did take Mantri's advice, and that gave the king and queen some hope that Rajkumar wouldn't mess up this very precious trade deal. Oops! Did they just say it out loud? No, they hadn't meant that. They definitely meant the love and happiness of two young people starting out in life before they got around to oppressing their citizens. They had definitely not meant the trade deal. The trade deal with the neighboring kingdom was just a side effect of the marriage. When the caravan reached a clearing, Rajkumar gave the signal to halt. It's getting dark, and this forest is full of dangers. If we are on the move, we are more vulnerable to being attacked. Instead, we should camp here in this clearing. He was absolutely right. The forest was indeed full of dangers. He may have been talking about lions and tigers and bears, but these woods actually held dangers that were far more sinister. I wonder if you've seen some of those Nat Geo or Animal Planet series that show the top 10 deadliest creatures in every continent. Well, the top 10 were all represented here in this forest. And yet, those Nat Geo and Animal Planet series fell short because they didn't show the deadliest of all creatures, the Yakshas. Ah, but you may object. Aren't Yakshas benevolent nature spirits? To that I say, yes, they can be, and usually are. But sometimes they aren't. And when they aren't, they can be more than just capricious. They can be vicious. There's the example of the Yaksha and the Pandavas, something that ended up in the demise of all but one of the Pandavas. But that's a story for another time. Just take my word for it. Mantri knew all of this, of course, and he was worried. My prince, are you sure this is safe? There could be Yakshas all around. The prince wasn't concerned. I hope there are Yakshas all around. Maybe they'll give us a few gifts. I guess he hadn't heard the story of the Pandavas and the Yaksha. Maybe because I haven't covered it yet. Relax, Mantri. You're too tense. Which reminds me, we need at least 2 tents for you and I. The servants and guards can sleep outside. For all intents and purposes, for them at least, camping is just sleeping outside. The tents that Rajkumar was referring to were camouflage tents, which made it really hard to find them in their cargo. But eventually they found them and set them up, along with a roaring campfire. As generally happens around a campfire, the group began making s'mores and telling each other stories. Mantri told one. A few guards told some more. Rajkumar's verdict was a little bit blunt. Boring. I'd rather read an appendix to an export-import duty manual than to hear stories like that. They were so boring that I fell asleep. And I was only woken up by the sound of silence when you stopped narrating. Here, hold on to your turbans while I tell you a real story. And Rajkumar launched into his tale. He may have been unfairly critical of the earlier stories, but Mantri and the others quickly realized that the criticism wasn't without merit. Rajkumar seemed like an excellent storyteller. He began narrating an intricate saga with twists and turns. He had everyone's attention, and not just because he was their future king. They genuinely were engrossed in the complicated story with apsaras, giants, flying horses, talking birds, and such. And not just Mantri, the guards, and the servants. The prince's audience included some of the dangerous creatures in these woods. They were secretly listening in as well. And so, the Apsara on the flying horse, she escaped the fire pit and the 60-foot-long snake and headed straight for the giant Rakshasa's open mouth with its glistening sharp teeth. And we'll end it here for now. I'm feeling sleepy. We'll continue the story later. But everyone was far too intrigued to let it go. But I must know, did the Apsara rescue her friend or not? Mantri exclaimed. He wasn't the only one. A guard wanted to know if the Apsara's mother was going to find the potion to change her husband back after a wizard had turned him into a lizard. In the distance, a lion asked if the Apsara completed the side quest of finding the Gulab Jamun tree. But none of the humans understood Lionese. Rajkumar remarked that it was time for the guards to get back to their position. Hadn't they heard that lion roar? Reluctantly, the guards returned to their positions, but not before stealing another wistful glance at the prince, in case he changed his mind and decided to finish the story after all. But no, Rajkumar was firm. "Run along," he said, and then paused. "Actually, you can't run along. You can only ran along, because it's past tense. Past tense. Get it?" The guards got it, but it didn't do much to lift their spirits. Later, one of them took a vow to finish the story in a fanfiction version. If Rajkumar wouldn't finish it, the guard would do it himself to get some closure. The wild animals all dispersed. Everyone went to sleep, except Mantri. He couldn't sleep because he heard some noises. He crept slowly towards them to hear what was going on. At first, he thought they were the soldiers or the servants, but it was neither. His heart beat wildly as he suddenly realized that he was eavesdropping on a group of yakshas. They too had secretly been part of the audience. "This is infuriating," said one of the yakshas. "It's like watching the final ball of a cricket match with 6 runs to be scored, and the players on both sides suddenly decided to call it quits." Another yaksha agreed. Or to read a Byomkesh Bakshi mystery only to find the last page with the parlor scene has gone missing. The rest of them voiced their agreement. The first yaksha, after a pause, said, "I'm going to make the prince pay by setting a trap for him. When he hits the road tomorrow, he'll come across a tree. There'll be a gold necklace in the tree. When the prince wears it, it will kill him instantly." The second yaksha said, "Great idea, bro. I have a backup in case your idea doesn't work. Past your necklace tree, the prince will see a mango tree. If he eats even a single mango from the tree, he will fall down dead." A third yaksha also felt that these were great ideas, but needed another backup. And that backup was the marriage hall where Rajkumar and Rajkumari were going to be married. The structure would collapse the moment Rajkumar stepped in. A fourth yaksha added that if all that wasn't enough, tomorrow night when the prince went to bed, he would sneeze 100 times. And unless someone was with him to bless him on every single sneeze, the prince will not wake up. "Do you mean he'll have a restful sleep?" the second yaksha asked. "A permanent sleep," the fourth yaksha clarified. Mantri, as he was watching from the shadows, was badly shaken. Even just one life-threatening danger was bad enough, but his boss and friend was about to face 4 of them. He must go and warn the prince about all these devious traps. He slowly got up and began crawling stealthily back to the tent.
And I have something else,
A fifth yaksha added, just in case anyone has been eavesdropping on us and tries to warn the prince about all these devious traps. If they speak about this to anyone, they will die too, right away. The first yaksha, who was a little hungry despite the deviled eggs and demonade he had been eating and drinking, suggested a different approach.
We all have night vision. It will be a lot simpler to just look around and spot whoever is eavesdropping and just eat them.
Mantri froze mid-motion. He held his breath. Surely, the end was here. But no. The other four yakshas voted down the night vision idea. Their plots had a reputation for being devious. They needed to uphold that. The next morning, Mantri was silent. He couldn't explain anything to the prince. He just went along, quietly, as the group packed up and began their journey towards Rajkumari's kingdom. Soon enough, the prince spotted something glinting from a tree. It looked like a golden necklace, just the kind that Rajkumar loved. He asked Mantri to fetch it. Mantri was ready. That's not a necklace. It's just a little bit of glass or metal that is reflecting in the sun. That seemed to satisfy the prince. Thankfully, it was a sunny day, so the explanation seemed plausible at least. Rajkumar hadn't realized that gold is also a metal. That was the silver lining of not paying attention in class. They moved on. They reached the tree with delicious-looking mangoes. Rajkumar wanted a bite. Again, Mantri was ready and intervened. Why are you wasting your time on these mangoes when there is a delicious feast waiting for us in Rajkumari's kingdom? The prince was reluctant, but only gave in when Mantri reminded him that given this was ancient India, they didn't have a very good way of keeping food hot. They should hurry on to their destination. Mantri changed his tune completely when they got to the marriage hall, and he observed that it hadn't collapsed yet. Wait, Rajkumar, don't go in yet. The prince was puzzled.
Why not?
Your shoelaces.
Mantri, what do you mean my shoelaces? They aren't undone. I can see them clearly.
Oh, they aren't undone now, Rajkumar, but they are about to be. You should undo them and do them all over, and do the other shoe too, for good measure. The prince sighed and agreed. He didn't want to appear in the wedding portraits with undone shoelaces. He signaled his servants, who set up a stool for him to sit on, and they got to work on his shoelaces. All the while, Mantri kept glancing at the hall. It hadn't collapsed yet. The shoelaces were done now, and the shoes were polished as well. Rajkumar tried to go in, but Mantri stopped him again to get some lint off of the prince's shoulder. The prince couldn't even see it, but whatever, he just gave in again. When that was done, and the hall still hadn't collapsed, Mantri tried to point out that one of the prince's buttons was slightly loose and needed to be undone and sewn again. But Rajkumar drew the line there.
Enough of this, Mantri. You said it yourself. The food is getting cold. If the inner button of my jacket falls off, so be it. More than likely, it will just set a new trend.
He stepped in, and the moment he did, the entire structure began shaking. Mantri was able to quickly pull him out before it all came down. The prince was thankful. He guessed that Mantri had some sort of sixth sense. And as for Rajkumari's family, the collapsing structure was not their fault. That was just an act of God, and the hall had no additional insurance. If there had been any malice on the part of the hosts, the prince would have expected that they would have collected a big wad of cash on insurance at the same time. The feast went well, and the marriage was scheduled for the next day. However, one last danger remained: the curse of the 100 sneezes. That night, as Rajkumar was going to bed, Mantri stealthily climbed onto the balcony of the prince's sleeping quarters. Mantri lay there in wait. He didn't have to wait very long. And every time Rajkumar sneezed, Mantri was there to softly add, "Bless you." Now, I've often wondered why Rajkumar didn't summon somebody after the fifth or sixth sneeze. He had, after all, his own doctor in his group. And what's more, Rajkumari's kingdom's resources were also at his disposal. It made Mantri's job much harder because he needed to keep saying "bless you" after each sneeze. Sometimes they occurred in such rapid succession that Mantri couldn't really discern if Rajkumar had sneezed 3 times or 4. But to be on the safe side, Mantri added a liberal dose of "bless yous." No harm in blessing Rajkumar more than needed. At the conclusion of the 100th sneeze, Mantri heaved a huge sigh of relief. Rajkumar, who had not responded as seriously to all the sneezing, sat bolt upright when he heard the faint sigh from the balcony and shouted,
Who goes there?
The prince didn't think it was an owl. For one thing, an owl does not respond, "Please don't shoot," to a question like that. Rajkumar was very, very cross with Mantri, and he was trying to think up a punishment for the fellow. He also resolved to strengthen his kingdom's anti-stalking laws when he took up the throne. Mantri explained everything. It seemed like a fantastic story, but the prince believed him.
You know, it's funny. Nothing in the Yaksha's curse said that you wouldn't drop dead for telling me about the curses after they had happened. Was it really safe to reveal all?
It hadn't been, that was true, but Mantri had merely traded the real harm the prince was about to do him for the possibility that the Yakshas had an expiration clause built in after the other curses had passed. Rajkumar was convinced and knew what he needed to do on the way back.
You know, I think I'll pick a shorter story for the return journey, and I will be sure to finish it this time. Just like the story of the princess, the mountain climbing fish, and the 7-headed snake. The one where the princess has to free her entire family from a Rakshas, and she overcomes every obstacle until the Rakshas catches her and puts her in a cage suspended over a volcanic crater. What happened next will shock you. You'll never believe how the magical golden spoon and the silver bowl
took some water and... His voice trailed off as he dozed off on the spot. That's it for this time. A few notes. The Kathasaritasagara literally means the ocean of the stream of stories, because these stories flow. This anthology was compiled by Somdev, a 11th century scholar and poet in a kingdom in Kashmir. He had compiled the Kathasaritasagara to amuse the queen, Suryavati. Somdev condensed an earlier and much larger set of stories called the Brihat Katha. The Brihat Katha itself was just volume 7 in a much larger set of stories, inscribed in blood by its author. Considering the size of the Brihat Katha, it's more than possible that the author had liberal access to a blood bank. The first 6 volumes of the work are lost, and so is the Brihat Katha, but derivative works, including the Kathasaritasagara, remain. All of this knowledge may be lost to most folks, but when you're a time-traveling, immortal, all-knowing person like me, such knowledge cannot stay hidden. And I will continue to bring these stories to you. In the next episode, we are back to the Ramayana. We'll continue the story with Indrajit and Lakshman's rematch. Indrajit had hurt Ram and Lakshman quite badly in their first battle. We'll find out if Lakshman does better in this round. Thank you all for the comments on social media and on Spotify's Q&A. I can't directly reply to the questions there, but I'll address them here on this show. Raj, of course, I am indeed a time-traveling, all-knowing, bona fide mythological character. Kyra, I love that you loved that episode so much. Thank you for your support. Mushroom, wonderful to hear you're keeping up to date on all these episodes. Hiranmai, the answer is simple. It's your support and the support of all of you listeners which gives me all the encouragement I need to keep churning out these stories. Raju, yes, Garud and the Nags were also the children of Kashyap, and many others. There are so many, it's easy to lose track. The Asur Bali was a descendant of Kashyap, not his son. He was technically his great-great-grandson. Ira, thank you for the generous praise. I do have a Chandrakanta episode lined up soon. Shiv, thank you. Akbar and Birbal is also lined up. Deep Enjoy, thanks for the support. The Moon story is an interesting one, and I will definitely aim to cover it. Shalu, thank you yet again. Your feedback is very valuable to me. I will be more than happy to do a Tenali Raman story in March. I did cover some stories of his animosity towards animals back in episode 2 and episode 3, at the very beginning of this podcast. If you have any other comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com, or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to send me an email, it's storiesfromindiapodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.